Just as Jesus's body was vulnerable to people's sin, this text is also vulnerable to people's sin. And just as Jesus's body was wounded, he carries his wounds. This text is wounded, and it's the word itself is wounded and carries its wounds in its body for us.
Welcome back to Religion to Reality, the podcast about living an integrated life. I'm your host, Dave Plisky, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Father John Gribowich. The season is all about listening, and so we're doing our best to listen to voices from across faith traditions. And we've just wrapped up listening to all kinds of faith traditions. The last one was Shinto, the traditional religion of Japan. In this episode, we speak with Elizabeth Schrader Polczer, who is a New Testament scholar specializing in the Gospel of John. This episode fits into the season because she is a Protestant, and we do eventually discuss what it's like for her teaching at a Catholic university. But this episode also stands apart because it focuses mainly on Elizabeth's research on Mary Magdalene and the related textual changes in the Gospel of John. So it's truly a unique and interesting conversation. It just stands a little bit apart from mostly of what the project has been this season about kind of speaking to different people of different faith traditions and denominations within Christianity. I'll also just say that if you want to hear John legitimately amazed by what he hears, this is the episode for you. Today, we are joined by Elizabeth Schrader Polczer. Elizabeth is an assistant professor of New Testament at Villanova University, having defended her PhD in early Christianity and New Testament at Duke University in 2023. Her studies focus on textual criticism, Mary Magdalene, and the Gospel of John. Elizabeth transitioned to religious scholarship after a long career as a singer-songwriter. After writing a song about Mary Magdalene, Elizabeth enrolled in the MA program at the General Theological Seminary of the Episcopal Church in Manhattan. Her interest in the text of John's Gospel culminated in the publication of her master's thesis in the Harvard Theological Review. Her first book, An Abundant Bouquet, Narrative Variants in the Gospels, is currently under press with Society of Biblical Literature Press. She is regularly invited to present her peer-reviewed research on Mary Magdalene at churches and conferences internationally. Elizabeth, it's great to have you.
Hey, Dave, it's great to see you. And John, hi.
Great to meet you.
We usually like to just understand where people are coming from. So would you care to just share kind of like a little bit of your story and tell, feel free to go as far back as you like, but we'd love to hear about particularly your spiritual journey and what your life was like.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to share about my sort of spiritual life growing up. I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I definitely went to church very regularly as a child, and I was very active in my church youth group in high school. And then when I got to college, I sort of became more interested in branching out, and partly because I won this big contest in New York. I got to open for Jewel in summer stage.
Cool.
I sort of got to meet her mom, Lenedra Carroll, who had written a book sort of about meditation. And I was like, oh, I want to learn about meditation. And so I tried sort of meditating for a little while. And I would say I became very interested in Eastern meditation, especially in my 20s. And at a certain point during that time, I was sort of interested in like, okay, so sometimes in Eastern meditation, people have a guru, and I wonder who my guru is. And during that time, I was sort of seeking, and along the way, I realized that my sort of spiritual guide was Mother Mary. And I was like, oh, interesting. That wasn't really what I was expecting, but it's sort of like once you find her, you know her. And I'm like, this is my spiritual guide. And so at that point, I really started committing to going back to church, the Episcopal Church, and I still do. Um, though also at the time that I discovered that, I started going to a Catholic church sort of around the block from where I lived in Prospect Heights at that time. And that is actually where I met Dave. This is it's now the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. I was living in Brooklyn at the time.
Right.
And there was a lovely old woman there, Helena, who Jamaican lady, who taught me how to pray the rosary. And this was really wonderful for my connection to the Virgin Mary. And so I would sometimes go there and I would pray the rosary in the garden. By the way, Helena is still alive. I think she's like 101 years old. And I try to
Gosh.
check on her whenever I go to Brooklyn now, but she's still around. She taught me the rosary. And so yeah, around that time I was a singer-songwriter. That was how I was a music major undergraduate, and I was teaching piano and playing shows and making CDs, like releasing records to pay my bills. And it was around that time that I was having a prayer in this beautiful garden dedicated to the Virgin Mary in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. And I actually heard words in response to my prayer, which very, very rarely happens to me. And the words that I heard were, maybe you should talk to Mary Magdalene about that, which was
Mm.
very strange because I had just sort of discovered that Mother Mary was my spiritual guide, and I wasn't thinking about Mary Magdalene at all. And so when these words popped into my head, I was like, that's very odd. And so I started walking home from the garden, and I sort of got the lyrics for a song, which were, I went to the garden of the Holy Virgin and I asked for the blessing of the Magdalene. And I'm like, oh, that's so cute. Like I got that on my walk home. And then I went to my house and I worked on the song, and it just popped right out in a couple days. I'm like, oh, look, I have a song about Mary Magdalene. That's not what I was expecting. I had been starting to go back to church, but at that time, I was more like I don't know, more like Adele or I don't know, like Sarah McLachlan. Like that's sort of the kind of music that I wrote, piano-based pop
Mm.
rock. I was more of like a secular songwriter. So it was strange to me that I'd written a song about Mary Magdalene. And I got really curious about her. And so one day I just walked over to the Brooklyn Public Library. As you know, it's very close to the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph. Um, and I just, went and I looked for a book on Mary Magdalene, and I got The Complete Idiot's Guide to Mary Magdalene,
Mm.
where I was able to just read as much as I wanted about her. And I learned that there was some like mysteries about her in the south of France, and I really wanted to find out about this. Basically, I just sort of went down this rabbit hole, which I have to say still continues to this day. The subject of Mary Magdalene is sort of the world's deepest rabbit hole, you
Mm.
might say. And along the way, I remember wondering, I wonder if there's any changes made to the text of John's gospel around Mary Magdalene. This was a thought that I had because I knew that she is a very prominent character. Her most prominent scene is in John chapter 20. And so I just really wanted to look at the world's oldest copy of John's gospel. I didn't have any training. I was just like a singer-songwriter with a music degree who'd
Mm.
written a song about Mary Magdalene, and I just wanted to look at the manuscripts. Dave, I don't remember where you were in this process when I was hanging out with you. But it must have been after, because I filmed the music video in the garden, right?
Yeah, you had already done that by the time we met. And then I was
Yeah.
kind of like there as you started doing your research and getting your degrees and everything. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. And so I ended up reaching out to a scholar in Manhattan, Deirdre Good at the General Theological Seminary. I wasn't still am Episcopalian, so that seemed like the natural place to reach out was the Episcopal Seminary in Manhattan. And she was able to send me a link to the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John. It's called Papyrus 66. It was copied around 200 AD, discovered in the 1950s. And I was just sort of like, okay, well, it's all in Greek. You know,
mm.
that doesn't really help me out.
Ancient Greek. Yeah.
I'm like a layperson, but I was very, I was very interested and I was very curious. So I persisted, and I basically got an interlinear study Bible. I opened my computer so that I had like the transcription of Papyrus 66 on one window, and then another browser window was open to an interlinear study Bible where I could compare each Greek word, and it's translated into English. And so because of that, I was able to look at the passages that featured Mary Magdalene in Papyrus 66. And so, I started in John chapter 20 and John chapter 19, and there wasn't really anything there that was out of the ordinary. I'm like, okay, well, that was sort of a funny idea. And it's also pretty presumptuous, honestly, for a singer-songwriter to think that they are going to find something. I was
Mhm.
like, maybe the scholars missed something. But then I had I had read sort of in my Complete Idiot's Guide, but also in a little commentary by Raymond Brown that someone had given to me, that some people have thought that Lazarus's sister Mary is Mary Magdalene. That's something that sort of throughout history has always been a question. Mary of Bethany, whether
Mm.
she's Mary Magdalene. So I said, oh, you know what? Well, why don't I just look at John chapter 11? So I just kind of flipped back in Papyrus 66. And when I saw the screen, I was like, whoa, because you can see in Papyrus 66 that there have been some major changes to the text. In John 11, you can see that the name Mary has been crossed out and changed to Martha. You can see that a woman's name has been crossed out and changed to say Hi Adelphi. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it means the sisters. And all the verbs have been changed from singular to plural. And so I was really shocked to find this. This was in 2012. And I was like, oh, look at this. Like, it looks like they're kind of crossing things out here. And it actually looks like Martha is getting added to the story. I was like, well, isn't Martha in a different gospel? She's in Luke's gospel, right? There's a different story in Luke with Martha and Mary. Jesus goes to their house, and Martha's busy and distracted, and Mary's sitting at Jesus's feet. And Martha says, tell my sister to help me. And Jesus says, Martha, Mary's chosen the better part and won't be taken from her. So that's a different gospel, right? So I knew about that story. And I said, wait, are they taking that character, Martha, and like adding her to this Lazarus story? That's just the first thought that popped into my head as a total layperson who just grown up going to the church, who didn't know Greek, who was looking at these alterations made to John chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus story, the oldest copy we have in the world. And so I sent it to Deirdre Good, the scholar at General Seminary, and she said, that's very interesting. I was like, and then what? Then what do we, what did you do? What did the scholars do? She didn't seem to know about it. And I soon learned that basically nobody had done anything about it. I went back to the Brooklyn Library. I started checking out articles on interlibrary loan. This is like a clue that my brain, actually doesn't just do music. It's actually a scholar, I have since learned, mainly because I'm just very curious and I want to know the answers to things. And I was able to read some of these first articles that were published about Papyrus 66 when it was discovered in the 1950s. And scholars said, oh, yes, look, the name Mary's been changed to Martha. Oh, look, a woman's been split in two. Her name's been crossed out, and now it says the sisters. And that was it. That was the end of the scholarship. And it's from some of the best textual critics in the world, Gordon Fee, Marie-Émile Boimard, and they were saying, oh, the one where the woman split in two, that's one of the most interesting changes in the entire papyrus. And that was it. And I was like, and then what? And then what? And so I basically soon realized that nobody had followed up on it. And so, it was over 50 years later, more like, 50 years since the 1960s when these articles had been published. And I realized nobody's doing anything. I tried to send it to scholars, like I sent it to Elaine Pagels at Princeton. And they didn't respond, or they were just like, that's cool, but they're busy. They're not doing anything. So I basically learned, look, I should give credit to my best friend, Kelly. She said to me, look, Libby, you have to stop harassing these scholars. You have to go get a degree. I was like, I don't want to learn Greek. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm a musician. Like, I've been a musician for over a decade. That's who I am. That's my career.
I toured in the States, not in Athens.
And so, but I eventually learned that, nobody was doing it. So somebody had to. So I enrolled in the master's program at General Seminary, and I did learn ancient Greek. And I did my master's thesis, not just on Papyrus 66, but on over 100 manuscripts of John. There's a website, johannes.com, IOHANNES.com, that Deirdre Good, my supervisor, she became my master's supervisor. She directed me to this website created by the University of Birmingham in England, where they work on the text. And you can sort of do a drop-down menu and look at over 100 manuscripts of John, like they've all been transcribed. So I sort of cataloged them all, and it turns out that there's dozens of manuscripts where the name Mary has been changed to Martha, or where Mary is doing something in John that you would expect Martha to be doing. And I also looked in General's Theological Library, wonderful theological library. I found out there's a lot of church fathers who said weird things, like Tertullian said, he was like 200 AD. He said that Mary confessed Jesus as the Christ. And I'm like, your Bible says that Martha confessed Jesus is the Christ. I'm like, did
Hmm.
did Martha get added to John? Did I just find, a change to the text of John, like as a singer-songwriter who wrote a pop song after a prayer to the Virgin Mary? Like that's weird.
Hmm.
It's truly strange. And so, but anyway, I wrote this master's thesis and I said, well, this seems important. Maybe I should submit it to a really good journal. And I said, well, the one that sounds fanciest is Harvard Theological Review. I'm gonna submit it there. And I was like, do you think that's okay? It's only a master's thesis. And Deirdre said, well, just tell them you're a master's student and ask if it's okay. And they said, well, as long as it doesn't exceed the word limit, it's okay.
Mm.
So I submitted and it made it through the peer review process. It went straight to the top, went right through. And so it was published in 2017. And that master's thesis is now cited a lot. I know that they teach it in Yale Divinity School. They teach it, in sort of intro John courses all over the country now. And
Cool.
I was informed a few months ago that there is now going to be a change to the Greek critical text, which is the Nestle-Aland Greek New Testament. It's sort of the standard text from which all it's the Greek text from which all Bibles are translated, including the New American Bible, which is the Catholic version, or the NRSV updated edition, which is more for mainline Protestants. So they're in the footnotes of the Nestle-Aland, they're going to be updating the footnotes to reflect those textual variants that I was telling you about.
Mm.
So
Congratulations.
it's basically gone to the top. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, there is a major textual problem in John's gospel around Martha's presence. Now, I haven't proven that Martha was added to the text, but I have highlighted that there's a major textual problem around Martha's presence in the text. And it matters because a lot of people have thought throughout history that Lazarus' sister Mary was Mary Magdalene.
Mhm.
And in that case, the word Magdalene doesn't reference where she comes from. It would be a nickname because Magdala just means tower. So is it that she comes from a town called Tower, or is it she herself is the tower? And so some people, like Saint Jerome, thought that it was a nickname, like Mary the Tower. So was Mary
Which
of
is a thing that Jesus was doing or others were doing right at the time.
nicknames,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you were asking about my spiritual journey, but basically it's so weird, I was just a
Mm.
singer-songwriter who wrote a pop song and I got this master's thesis published and then I went on to do my doctorate. I was like, so much for singing and songwriting. I found something and it seems like
Yeah.
somebody's got to be doing this. So I did enter I went to Duke for my PhD and I immediately got a job at Villanova University. And so now I teach New Testament at Villanova. And then the Pope got elected. It's like, oh, okay,
Mm.
that's where the Pope went to school. I'm like, okay, cool. So it's all been a very interesting journey.
Wow, it's so great. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about like what you think is implied by those changes from the
Sure.
scriptural changes? I mean, I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, well, so the question, I think it really does come down to that Christological confession because in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, somebody also confesses Jesus is the Christ, and you probably know who it is. It's Peter, right?
Yep.
Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says in Matthew's gospel, he says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church," right? So in the synoptic gospels, it's Peter who first recognizes Jesus to be the Messiah. But in John's gospel right now, it's a woman, which is different, right? People have always known that a woman confesses Jesus as the Christ in John's gospel, and that's just a little bit different. But I think it would be very different if the woman confessing Jesus as the Christ was Mary, because in John's gospel, there's a lot of clues that Lazarus's sister Mary could be Mary Magdalene. And this is, I think, at the root of why there's always been a question as to whether Lazarus's sister Mary, Mary Bethany, is Mary Magdalene. Now, remember, I'm only talking about in John's gospel here. It's tricky because people want to equate the gospels with history,
Mm.
but I'm trying to just say what is the intention of John? Okay, that's what I'm interested in. What is John's intention here? And John crafts Lazarus's sister Mary to be very, very similar to Mary Magdalene in many ways. Of course, she's named Mary, and she also witnesses someone she loves dearly rising from the grave. In John 11, that's Lazarus.
Mm,
And in John 20, it's Jesus,
mm,
right? There's a woman named Mary crying at a tomb who sees somebody rise from the dead. But there's other more subtle things too, like in John 11, Jesus says, "Where have you laid him?" Talking about Lazarus. But then in John 20, when Mary Magdalene is seeking the body, she asks, "Where have you laid him?" And it's the same Greek words.
mm,
So it's sort of this mirror question where Jesus is asking Mary in John 11, "Where have you laid him?" Mary and the others, "Where have you laid him?" And then in John 20, Mary Magdalene says to Jesus, "Where have you laid him?"
mm,
Also, even more subtle clues like Lazarus has this handkerchief called a sudarion. That's a Latin loanword. It's a very rare word in the New Testament. And they take off the sudarion from Lazarus. And then when inside Jesus's empty tomb, there's a sudarion there too. So there's scholars have always noticed that there's these really interesting parallels between the raising of Lazarus in John 11 and Jesus's resurrection in John 20. But even more so in John chapter 12, Mary anoints Jesus in Bethany. And when she does so, Judas criticizes her in John's gospel. And Jesus says, "Leave her alone. Let her keep the ointment for the day of my burial." So he's associating Mary, Lazarus's sister, with his tomb.
mm,
But in John 20, there's only one person who goes to Jesus's tomb, only one woman named Mary, and that's Mary Magdalene. So there's all these subtle parallels between John 11 and John 20, and people have always wondered if it's the same Mary. So I'm saying if you stick Martha in there, it kind of distracts you into a different gospel. It makes you think
mm,
about a different story. But if Martha weren't there, then the person who confesses Jesus as the Christ might also get the same appearance of the risen Jesus in the same gospel.
mm,
First person to confess Jesus as the Christ could be the first person who gets a vision of the risen Jesus. Ugh, that makes her a really prominent character. And in fact, it would make her in some people's eyes, that would make her a competitor to Peter
mm,
because like right now we do have a woman confessing Jesus is the Christ, but she's sort of a minor character. Martha's not threatening in any way, and she kind of
mm,
leaves after the Lazarus episode. She's gone.
mm,
But if the person who's confessing Jesus as the Christ makes this huge theological statement and she anoints Jesus, okay. And then she's also there at the foot of the cross. Mary Magdalene's at the foot of the cross, and she goes by herself to Jesus's tomb, gets the first appearance, and then he gives her this commission to go tell the disciples. Then she's a really prominent character. The confessor is also the person who gets, it's almost like she's rewarded for her confession by getting the first appearance of the risen Jesus. And so that I think would make her quite controversial. We know that Mary Magdalene was a highly controversial figure because of extra canonical texts like the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas. They all show that like Mary Magdalene was a highly controversial figure because, and it seems like the other disciples showed jealousy toward her in these other Gospels. And so it seems like maybe Martha would have solved a problem.
mm.
Maybe if
Interesting.
John is presenting her too prominently, if you source Martha from Luke's gospel and plop her into John, then, it kind of demotes Mary a little bit. She's not the Christological confessor anymore. Now there's multiple women
Why would
doing
they have picked
Wow.
another woman rather than use a man? Was it just like literarily or like textually easier to make that change in the Greek?
Definitely it was. Remember, there's no printing press at this time. So what I'm suggesting is that the Gospel of John is circulating with only one sister. It's going out there into the world with just Lazarus and Mary, and people are reading it that way. And so you can't really stop it. You can't stop it at this point. So what's going to happen is that if you're going to edit the text, since there's no printing press and you can't recall things, right? What you can do is you can make subtle changes to the text that eventually permeate the broader transmission.
And eventually aren't changes. They're just what the text says in later versions after it's been copied, right?
Right. That's called the textus receptus, the received text. Yes.
Hmm.
And so, yes, the difference between Mary or Maria in Greek and Martha is just one letter. You change the iota to a theta. Maria gets changed to Martha. And it's very easy to change the name Mary to Martha in Greek. And there would have to be, some substantial changes. There's a verse where Mary and Martha interact with one another, John 11:28. So if Martha were interpolated into the text, if the text had been changed in the second century, this editor would have had to make a significant change, especially there. But a lot of it might have just been duplications of what it originally said. A lot of scholars have already noticed that at John 11:21 and John 11:32, that Mary and Martha say an identical quote. They both say, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. It's like just this wooden repetition. So many scholars before me had said, we wonder if a sister was doubled here. People like Robert Fortna, Rudolf Bultmann, a lot of source critics, Gerard Rocher, suggested that, maybe John had a version of the story where there was only one sister, and John added a second sister to John's source material, right? But I'm saying, was it John that did that, or was it a later editor in the second century who made that change? And my master's thesis really did a very close study of over 100 manuscripts. I've now looked at about 280 something manuscripts, and you can see that there's this unevenness around Martha's presence in the entire textual transmission. It's not just in Papyrus 66. I think there's 1 in 5 Greek manuscripts have something funny around Martha anywhere that she might appear. Like sometimes Mary is serving the supper in John chapter 12, or sometimes Mary says the tomb stinks in John 11:39, depending upon the manuscript. So it's like
and generally there's not discrepancies between the rest of the text.
Correct. I actually also did a control study with Luke, right? I looked at hundreds of manuscripts of Luke's gospel in Luke 10:38 to 42, and the sisters are never confused in the transmission of Luke.
Are there other things that generally vary a lot in the texts, or is Martha
usually not the names of characters, okay. not the names of characters. And actually, that's what my book, you mentioned my book that's about to come out. I actually did a survey of all meaningful narrative changes in the Gospels, because I really wanted to get a handle on like how, of course, this is my starting place. So I want to say like how egregious would this be? How different would this be from the kinds of changes that we see? And yes, there are changes made throughout the textual transmission, meaningful and meaningless, because there's no printing press, and it's the job of textual critics, which now I am one. At the time, I was like, I'm not a textual critic, but did you look at this? Well, now I'm a textual critic. I have defended my dissertation in textual criticism, and it would be quite egregious to add a character. But you see other egregious changes made, usually in translation. Usually when manuscripts are getting translated from Greek into like Syriac or Greek into Latin, that's when you're more likely to get changes, but the addition of a character would be quite egregious. That said, if you follow the sort of the usual solution to the synoptic problem and assume that Mark is a gospel that is known by Matthew and Luke, I don't know if your listeners would know that. Did you guys? John, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah. Why don't you just unpack that a little bit? Because I don't know how versed everyone would be on that.
John, you went to seminary, right? So I'm guessing
Yeah.
probably yeah. Most New Testament scholars are in agreement that Mark was the first gospel written, and that Matthew and Luke had Mark at their disposal, right? And that's why they are so similar to one another. That's why they have verbatim strings of words and stories. Because Matthew and Luke used Mark as source material. But there's some stories where I think it has to do with the blind beggar, where Matthew takes one blind beggar and turns them into two blind beggars. So it's more like that, what I'm suggesting, where Mark is Matthew's source material and Matthew maintains the story but adds a second beggar to the story. It's more like that, what I'm talking about. So we do have some precedent for that, but usually it's done in the creation of a new edition. Some people think Matthew was like updating Mark, not usually within a story. But what I'm saying here really has to do with women's authority at the origins of Christianity. And so I'm saying that it might be that John was not seen as suitable for orthodoxy with a woman who had that much authority. And so it's possible that second century copyists who liked this gospel, we want this gospel, but we just don't know about that character. They were sort of solving a problem. If you just take Martha from Luke and stick her into John, then the person who confesses Jesus is the Christ is not the person who sees the risen Jesus. And now no woman can be seen as having too much authority. And now we can accept this gospel. So it's almost, it would have been quite an egregious change to the text. It wouldn't have been seen as sort of kosher to do something like that in the like it would be considered not honest in the copying of the gospel. But at the same time, somebody might have felt that it was urgent enough that it was justified to keep this gospel in circulation. And the gospel has been in circulation. We might have lost it. Irenaeus advocated for the fourfold gospel at the end of the second century, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But until Irenaeus did that, John was being debated. John could have gotten left in the dust.
Mm.
And so I think that this might have been something that was done to make John suitable.
What I want to know is like, so what's happening to you in your spirituality as you're going through all your studies and your research? Because I know, like, working for the church, formally, it changed something in me, like it sometimes it's hard, right? And I know that, like, academia doesn't necessarily always fit hand in hand with spirituality. So I just wanted to see what's happening with you as you are doing all this.
Well, I have to say it really strengthened my faith and it really cemented my commitment to Christianity. And I'll tell you why. Because it had to do with when I was looking at the same manuscript, like the same verse over and over and over and over for this master's thesis, like hundreds of times. I kept coming back to John 11, verse 4. And this is at the opening of the Lazarus story. Jesus is talking about Lazarus, and he says, "This illness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, in order to glorify the Son through it." And it's obvious that he's talking about Lazarus, right? But as I kept doing this work, I felt this resonance with maybe a higher trajectory in the transmission of John's gospel. That if this text has been changed, do you really think that God doesn't know that?
Mhm.
Is it possible that there is this sort of illness in the text that is not unto death? It's not for the death of Christianity, and it's not for the death of women's roles in the church. It's to show the glory of God. This is something that really resonated with me, and it honestly made me a little scared of John's gospel. I was like, this gospel is operating on a much higher level than any of us have given it credit for. And then the more I spend time with the text of John, it's very profound. Like in John chapter 12, I told you some manuscripts, Mary serves the supper in John chapter 12. And just a few verses later, Jesus says, "The one who serves me must follow me. And unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it cannot bear fruit." And I'm like, whoa,
Mhm.
has this character had to die so that this gospel could bear fruit? And then a couple chapters later, Jesus says, "There is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends."
Mm.
And I'm like, did Mary lay down her life for us so that we could get this gospel? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not comprehend it. I mean, this gospel is so meta. Um, every time I read and I have to re-engage with John every couple semesters because I teach it for my undergrads or my grad students. And I have to say, I'm bowled over every time I read John's gospel. It's a very, very profound text. And I think, was it St. Augustine? It's an Augustinian institution that I'm at, so we always think it's St. Augustine. But I think he said John's gospel is shallow enough for a child to play in, but deep enough for an elephant to swim in. And I think it's very true of John that it meets you where you are at. It seems so simple and it seems so straightforward, but the more time you spend with it, it expands and it's not a normal book. And I think what I'm hoping to do with my work is to explore whether John is operating not just through the autograph, but through the textual variants, through the trajectory, through the transmission of the text over time. And just as Jesus's body was vulnerable to people's sin this text is also vulnerable to people's sin. And just as Jesus's body was wounded, he carries his wounds. This text is wounded, and it's the word itself is wounded and carries its wounds in its body for us.
Mm,
Right? Right. Okay.
wow.
So I
Yeah.
tell you, this is where I'm like, okay, Christianity, I'm in. I am highly committed to my faith, but I know that it's not the usual way that people think about it. But at the same time, all I'm looking at is manuscripts of John. It's
Yeah.
like, who's going to complain about manuscripts of John's gospel? That is all that this is based upon.
That is super profound. I am just like, I'm energized just hearing this. That is
Oh, that means
so,
a lot to me from a Catholic
yeah.
priest.
No, it is, you're just speaking right to my heart with that. That is just beautiful.
I love
Uh, and as you say it, I can just understand it even more from approaching John. I mean, there's so much John right now in the Easter season, and I'm always like, it's hard when you're preaching on it because you're like, what, where do you go with this? Because like, there's so much you could do. And I usually just kind of say, I just need to pick one phrase to unpack because it's too much to try to like capture the whole pericope or like the whole, actual gospel that we're reading. And and I feel like it's for that reason that it's like a depth that there's an endless well, right? That you can just keep on going deeper and deeper. I mean, I did have a historical question because I'm just curious because I know that you've jumped into this. Actually, I have a few historical questions. I just can't. We don't have enough time to do all of it. But what do you know that you think is for certain of, say, the post-resurrection activity of Mary Magdalene?
For certain. Oh
Or, I
gosh.
mean, or like what are we commonly thinking? Yeah, we know pretty sure that this is what she was up to after the resurrection. Yeah,
Well, there's so many legends. I mean, there's like the golden legend that she went to the south of France and that she
right,
preached there. And if
right,
you
right.
go to see the Dominican monks that are on this mountain, like the Mary Magdalene Mountain, the Saint Baume in the
Sure.
forest there, they will say that that's where she lived out the end of her days in a cave. And there's paintings of her sort of preaching there at the Dominican monastery there. And so, but that's very legendary. And, of course, in Eastern Orthodox tradition, there's the idea that she went to the Emperor Tiberius and he said, "Oh, that a man could no more rise from the dead than this egg could turn red." And she holds up an egg, and the egg turns red. And then you
Hmm.
see like, the icon of Mary Magdalene with the red
Hmm.
egg.
Hmm.
These are, they're legendary. I don't think there's much that can be known. When you look at the Apocrypha, really all we have is the Gospel of Mary, and it's debatable whether the Gospel of Mary is Mary Magdalene, but I would say it probably is, or at least that it's a composite Mary, like her and Mary of Bethany, or just Mary, whatever Mary means to these people, because she says, I have seen, I saw the Lord in a vision. And it sounds very much like Mary Magdalene seeing the vision of the Lord in John 20, right?
Uh-huh.
So the Gospel of Mary um, is, we only have about half of it that survives, and we have it in three, maybe four copies. There's a new piece of it that might have just been published in 2023 that might be from like the one of the missing sections. But it's basically, it looks like it's maybe a post-resurrection dialogue between Jesus and the disciples. And when Jesus leaves, Mary sort of stands up to comfort the disciples. And some scholars have noticed that she seems to be sort of taking on the role of the paraclete here because the comforter, she's comforting the disciples and she's sort of speaking the words that Jesus spoke to her. So in some ways, she's sort of taking on the role of the paraclete in the Gospel of Mary. And then she starts sharing this vision that she had of Jesus. And then there's pages missing, which
Mm.
is unfortunate. We might have a little bit of that piece of that vision retrieved in Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 5577, which was published in 2023. You can look it up if you're interested. But then when the pages return in the main manuscript, we have the Coptic manuscript. She kind of comes to rest, and then Andrew and Peter say, I don't think this is real. The Lord never said that. These teachings sound strange. And Mary starts crying. She says, Do you think I've made these things up? And Levi stands up for Mary and he says, Peter, you've always been hot-headed. Um, uh, you're like the adversaries that are you're sort of contesting against Mary the way that the adversarial powers do. against us. And if the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her?
Mm.
And then, so it's, but we don't, it's not a complete gospel. We only have part of it. And I'm not saying that that should be equated with history. It's just as far back, it's a second century gospel.
Yeah.
Perhaps, perhaps Mary continued to dialogue with the other disciples. We don't know. Perhaps there was controversy around her leadership.
Yeah.
Uh, but but that can't be equated with history. Even the second century apocryphal text cannot. So I don't think we have much in the way of history after, I mean, if you believe in the resurrection, which I do, uh,
Hmm.
after Jesus appears to her and she runs and she tells the others, it's kind of anyone's guess what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think even Pope Francis is very sympathetic to this, right? I mean, he's the one who kind of elevated the weight of the liturgical feast so to an apostle. So I mean, like that's pretty remarkable in some ways. Um, all right, so this is just a fun question because I've been doing a lot of reading in this area with the films of Martin Scorsese. So Last Temptation of Christ.
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts on the way that Mary Magdalene is portrayed in that film?
Hmm. It's so weird because I loved that movie when I was in high school.
Hmm.
I think it's mainly because of Peter Gabriel, though, because Peter Gabriel has an absolutely fantastic soundtrack. So I
Yeah.
think that was a huge part of why I liked it so much. But I remember like just being really fascinated with that movie. And now looking back on that, I'm like, why did I like that movie? I like made my friends watch it like in
Yeah.
high school. Like, why are we watching this, movie that's over a decade old? Um, uh, I think now as a scholar of Mary Magdalene, I'm irked that they present Barbara Hershey as sort of a woman of dubious sexual reputation because there's nothing like that in the text. This is something that is put on Mary Magdalene by Pope Gregory in
Mm.
591 AD, which is, several centuries after the Gospels. And I was actually asked, ooh, just because I have it on my desk, I'm going to show you. I was asked to write the chapter on patristics for the Oxford Handbook of Mary Magdalene.
Oh, wow.
So I got to have the fun job of looking at every single patristic reference to Mary Magdalene until Pope Gregory. And they said so many different things about her. I mean, some people said that she was a virgin. Some people thought that she was Mary of Bethany. Some people thought that she was Martha's sister. And some people thought that she was the new Eve. A lot of people said she was the new Eve. Some people presented her as the bride, sort of
Hmm.
as the church. And there was just such a wide diversity of opinion about Mary Magdalene's role leading up to Pope Gregory. And it wasn't until, centuries afterward that he said that she should be identified as the sinner from the city in Luke's gospel.
Mm.
Um, and the reason he did that is because in Luke's gospel, there is an anonymous woman who anoints Jesus's feet, but it's much earlier in the ministry and it's further north. It's like in Galilee that this happens, and it's a very, very different setting than in Bethany, where in Matthew, Mark, and John, the anointing takes place.
Hmm.
Matthew, Mark, and John, there's a woman who anoints Jesus just before his passion, sort of inaugurating his passion.
Hmm.
In John only, she's identified as Mary.
Mm.
So what Pope Gregory did was he mixed together that sort of anointing scene in Bethany with this anonymous sinner from the city anointing Jesus in Luke's gospel. And he sort of put them all together along with the previously circulating idea that Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene. So people
Mm.
have been thinking that Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene for quite a long time.
Right.
Pope Gregory just kind of rolled them all into one and said, oh, yes, this sinner from the city. Probably, he said she perfumed her flesh in forbidden acts. My
Mm.
brothers, it is clear. It's like it never says that in the text. My brothers, it is clear. And so he sort of rolls that into this sort of Mary of Bethany, Mary Magdalene figure. And that's how she became a prostitute in the
Yeah.
Christian tradition. And then it finds its way into all this film and movies and stuff. And
Right.
uh, I don't really watch The Chosen, but I think that at the beginning of The Chosen, she's sort of
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too, because I have not really watched too many episodes of that, but I think the first episode is focused on her. And I thought that it was interesting. She's not presented as a prostitute.
But isn't she like in an inn? I haven't watched it, but people have told me that that there might be something dubious about her.
I mean, she definitely like goes under, like seems to need an exorcism type of thing. Like
Yeah,
that's how she's.
Oh, the
she seems to
exorcism.
be like have a demonic possession. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well
Yeah.
then maybe The Chosen is doing a slightly better job because
Yeah.
Luke does say that Jesus healed her of demons, but
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with sexual
No,
misconduct.
she's not. She's not presented like she has sexual
Oh, I'm
misconduct
Yeah,
really
stuff.
that
okay.
was interesting because it wasn't that way. Yeah.
So they're sort of fixing it, which is great because nobody thinks the Gerasene demoniac was a sex worker. I mean,
Mm.
come on. Like just
Hmm.
because she had demons doesn't mean that she's, has to have sexual demons. So it's really Pope Gregory's fault. And Martin Scorsese was continuing that
Sure.
in The Last Temptation of Christ. But it seems as though popular culture is correcting that, which it
Hmm.
really should, because Mary Magdalene should be remembered as the first person to witness the risen Jesus.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't we remember her that way? And you got to be wondering, like, how is it that her legacy was changed in that way? And isn't that like slightly sketchy that
Hmm.
the tradition got bent in that
Yeah.
direction?
So, Libby, what's it like for you being, an Episcopal at a Catholic university?
Well, I have to say Villanova is a fairly ecumenical place. And I love my department. I think there's not very many academics that would say that about their department. I find everybody in my department to be very faithful, but also very committed to caritas, which is, one of these Augustinian values. I would say that sometimes with the students, I'm learning from them about like in the Catholic tradition, like I'm interested in how Protestants are really more focused on uh certain like historical critical and analyses of the biblical text, whereas my Catholic students might have a more traditional or canonical view of like sort of comparing all the texts in comparison with one another. And so I'm sort of still navigating how Catholics have grown up with the Bible and how it influences their read of the Bible versus my very Protestant upraising and historical critical training in the Bible that I got at Duke. So, synthesizing that and wanting to best serve the students is one of my sort of learning curves along the way. But I would say that as an institution, Villanova very much practices what it preaches, and it's very committed to caring for the faculty members and the students,
Hmm.
and to being, faith-seeking understanding, which is another Augustinian value. And they hired a Hebrew Bible scholar to teach Old Testament
Hmm.
and a Protestant scholar to teach New Testament. They're really interested in learning from other traditions to best inform their understanding of faith. So I think this Catholic university, I can't speak highly enough about Villanova and how it integrates faith life into critical thinking and also modern life in a way that's really committed to making the world a better place. And I see that in the students as well. So
Yeah.
it's a great place to be.
It's great, so great
Uh,
to hear. I'm going to be talking up Villanova more to my high school students. So
Oh, all
yeah,
right. If they come visit, tell them this is
they graduate this Saturday, so I'm just
Oh, wow.
call yeah.
Congratulations to them.
Yeah, we
um,
had baccalaureate last night. It was great. So
I once upon a time I used to subscribe to the Reddit subreddit Catholicism. I no longer do because it pisses me off too many times. But I remember someone talking about Mary Magdalene, and it was early on when I had just heard about your research. So I tried to turn someone onto it in this thread, and I
Oh,
immediately got shut down by someone's like, "No, this is a Protestant, who's like doesn't understand Pope Gregory the Great, blah blah blah." It was like a really frustrating response. And obviously, they don't speak for all Catholics or anything like that, of course.
like
But
Pope Gregory is like writing long after. I mean, Jerome wouldn't even say that,
it was
yeah.
yeah. Anyway, but I guess it makes me think of two questions for you. Like one is if I wondered if your work is received differently in different denominations, and two, I wonder if you find that interreligious dialogue is something that needs to be done differently when you're online versus like in person or those types of things. Like I just wonder if you're encountering those types of things.
Do you mean interreligious or interdenominational?
Well, I guess in this case it would be interdenominational, ecumenical. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to interdenominational dialogue, I'd rather not do it online.
Mhm.
I'd rather do it in person or like on, when you can have a conversation such as what we're having right now.
Mhm.
Um, and as far as the reception of my work, it really helps to get this kind of credibility with the critical text because I mean there's Catholic scholars on this critical edition as well, and this is the industry standard that even Catholic Bibles are translated from. So getting that sort of credibility, it's sort of like this is a real conversation that you can't dismiss. If I'm just a singer-songwriter, you can.
Mhm.
But if I'm
Mm.
actually, peer reviewed in a top journal and a professor at a Catholic institution, and I'm getting the Greek critical text footnotes changed, okay, this is a real issue that we need to talk about. And I would say that conversation is just beginning. There are certain, I would say, especially more conservative evangelical denominations who are really only interested in like the King James Bible or the Textus Receptus, like sort of the majority text. And then the conversation is just immediately shut down to begin with. But I would want to talk to them too, because I think a lot of people are worried about secularization and modernity. But from John's response earlier in the podcast, I hope it's clear that I am not advocating for secularization. I am not saying that the text is just a historical text.
Mm.
I'm absolutely arguing for the inspiration of Scripture, just in a different way than we've assumed that it works. I'm saying that John is bigger than we've given it credit for.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a conversation that I would love to have with all Christians, actually, to see, because I find that when people indicate their commitment to Jesus and their commitment to the faith, hearts are often softened and people are more willing to listen.
Mhm.
That's been my
Yeah.
experience.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I've been transformed by just by the whole way of approaching it that, the word, which we equate as scripture, is really the wounded word of Christ. Like, I think that's just such a great dynamic to kind of just meditate upon. I mean, which honestly, we all know that. Like, it's no secret. Like, we know that we're always dealing with the limitations of translations and just the context of when things are written. Like, it's a complete mess. There's nothing that's just kind of just plopped in front of us that's like this is it. Like, it has to take in the whole human story that's kind of working the actual divine inspiration. I mean, it's to me that's what makes it interesting, if anything, because it's actually mimicking or not mimicking, but reflecting just the very reality of the wounded person that we are, which of course is reflecting the wounded person of Christ himself. I mean, so it's just a great way to approach the scripture from a very incredibly from a very incredibly faithful place. I mean, like that is not like hyper like historical critical method, that's it, that's all we're doing here. I mean, like this is like a very mystical way of approaching it actually. So that's awesome. I mean, it's so exciting. I'm just so curious. Like, how has your music sensibility maybe informed this outlook, or do you see, a connection there?
I would say that the biggest connection is probably in my ability to sort of be creative, first of all. Now I'm just writing tons and tons of articles rather than tons and tons of
Uh-huh.
songs. I don't have
Right.
time for songs anymore, but I've got like
Right.
5 articles that I'm working on, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Book. And I would also say the ability to sort of craft a narrative is not
Mm.
unlike crafting a song. I
Yeah.
don't think it's a coincidence that my first publication was published in the Harvard Theological Review. I had written so many songs that I knew how to craft a beginning, a middle, and end, a denouement to wrap it all up at the end to make it accessible. And that somehow from songwriting got translated into writing an argument.
Yeah.
So that's my best explanation. But I don't really write songs anymore because I simply don't have time.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to say earlier, what you were talking about with the woundedness, is that it seems like with the text, it's almost like another facet of the incarnation.
Mm,
A word
mm.
coming onto the manuscript page is another aspect of the incarnation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I love it. Love it.
Final question for you before we go. We're asking all of our guests, this season the first season was all about, we kept hearing from our guests over and over how sacred listening is. And so that's what inspired this season of us trying to listen to other voices from other denominations and other faith traditions. And so we wondered, how do you cultivate a posture of listening and, ideally listening without agenda?
Listening without agenda. Well, that's something that you must do as a scholar. You have to really listen to people who both you agree with and who you disagree with. Otherwise, you are not going to have a very strong scholarship. But I also am really interested in what the Gospel of John says at its opening, that without Jesus, not one thing was made, which means that all things, all religions also come. Like if you really believe in that, that the word is the origin of all creation, then that means that every facet of creation is some sort of revelation. And I often find that the thing you most need to hear is hidden in the person who you immediately dismiss as other.
Mm.
So God has a path laid out for us on how to expand love for creation. And the thing that you sometimes need and want the most, you cannot access until you really listen to the other. That's what I have found along the way. And so that really deep reflection, and I think that I did when I was doing a lot of meditation in my 20s, I think that did teach me a different kind of listening that maybe gave me a perspective that allowed me to look at the biblical text in a slightly different way. And so even though I'm committed to Christianity, I do owe something to Eastern tradition and my practice of meditation for maybe expanding my consciousness on some level. And so I would say that is a type of listening, of acknowledging that God is present in the other, and the thing that we need is hiding there. So we have to be open to the other, to finding the treasure that awaits us there.
Beautifully said.
Amazing. Can't wait to read the book.
It's a dissertation, so I don't know how much you enjoy it, but yeah, there's a lot of info in there.
It's great.
Thank you so much for coming on, Lily. This has been great to catch up and hear all about your work and everything.
Thanks.
Peace.
So what a great conversation with Elizabeth Schrader Polczer. It always feels a little bit weird for me to say that when I'm referring to a friend of mine, as if I'm like proud of knowing her before she was a scholar, but I'm just grateful for the good conversation we got to have. But what do you think about her work? What do you think about the idea of the suffering word not being only the Logos, but the Bible itself and the Gospel of John specifically? Certainly something to ponder on your next read. Our next episode is going to be with Kelly Deutsch, who is a spiritual director and gives us a taste of what life is like and how your spirituality might change as you go through a serious illness and hardship, and also what it means to live second half of life spirituality. Religion to Reality is a podcast, but also a monthly interfaith gathering. You can join us for free every month. We meet on the first Wednesday of the month, and you can sign up at our Substack, religiontoreality.substack.com. Father John also has a Substack called Going Analog. You can be found at johngribowich.substack.com. And we have a website, religiontoreality.org, where you can find out more about our guests and all the show notes for the episodes and all that good stuff. Religion to Reality was created and is executive produced by me, Dave Plisky, and is produced and edited by Nick Stropoli and Connor Donnelly. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.